Hey everyone, it's Rachel here for another episode of T Hawks 2 Cents. Today we're just going to talk about something that's super beginner level, that if you're just getting into metalsmithing, that it's something that you'll probably need to know just to get started. So when you first get started, you have to learn how to saw things out by hand. There's lots of different saws out there, and it's really personal preference as to what kind of saw you buy. Some are more expensive. Some have like these little mechanisms that make it easier for you to insert your blade and tighten it properly. And so there's fancy ones like this. It's got a bigger gap right here so you can get further into metal. So if I'm sawing bigger pieces, that's the only time I really use this saw. It's not my favorite saw, to be honest. This saw though, I got one of these when I very first started metalsmithing. They're like 20 bucks, and I actually prefer these over some of the more expensive saws. I just like the way they feel. They're easy to operate, and so I will just use a regular jeweler's saw. First off, they have these little nubbins. As you can see, these like twisty nubbins. This is how you loosen and tighten your blade when you're inserting a new one or taking a broken blade out. And all you have to do is basically turn these guys a little bit, and then bam, your blade pops out. Also, when we're talking about sawing, another thing that you got to keep in mind is when you're buying saw blades, it's really important to buy the right size of saw blades because they come in all different sizes. So you have like a standard 1 or 2 blade, that's something that I will use on like an 18 gauge. If you're, you know, cutting out small holes and you have to pierce and you don't want a big saw blade, or you're making really tight turns, you're gonna wanna go with a smaller saw blade like a 4/0. So if you're going with a 1, 2, 3, 4, those get larger as the number gets bigger. But if you're in the aughts, if you have a 1/0, that's gonna be bigger than a 4/0. So it's kind of a little counterintuitive when you're buying saw blades, so that's just something to keep in mind. So you're gonna want about 2 to 3 saw teeth per metal thickness. So just as an example, say that this is how thick your metal is, you're gonna want at least 2 to 3 saw teeth per metal thickness just to make sure that you get a really nice cut. When you're sawing, it's a different way of cutting. So you're actually removing a little bit of metal in between. You're not pinching it like you would with shears or a guillotine shear or something like that. So you have to be aware of how many saw teeth there are per metal thickness. First things first, so when you are putting your saw blade in, you have to know there's a proper direction. You want the teeth facing down. You don't want the teeth facing up like this. So you have to look at your saw blade and determine, you know, which direction those teeth are going. And so the saw teeth are going like this on this piece, so I'm gonna put the blade in like this. So you wanna make sure the saw teeth are facing up this way, and they're also facing up this way, if that makes sense. Okay, so to put this saw blade in, you want to put the top part in first and stick that all the way up in the edge, and then tighten that little guy. And then what I do is I will put this on the edge of my bench here, and I use this little pit of my shoulder to hold the handle, and I basically will push in on my bench, like I'll line the saw blade up into where it has to go, and then I'll push on my bench very slightly until I have a nice tight fit in there. And one thing that I always do is I kind of take my finger and I ping it along the blade, because the blade should make a certain sound like this. That's how you know that your saw blade is nice and tight in there. If your saw blade's not tight in there and it's a little bit loose, you're gonna have a hard time cutting. It's gonna break because you don't have the tension that you need. So this is what it sounds like when it's not tight. So that's just a really good indicator to figure out how tight your saw blade is, or if it's the right tightness. So once you have your saw blade in your saw, you're ready to go ahead and start sawing. Now there's a couple of different things that you're gonna want to pay attention to. Your saw station should be about chest length high, and that gives you a lot of control. It allows you to see your piece and the lines that you've drawn on your piece to make sure that it's cut out properly. You also don't want to have your saw going perpendicular or sideways. You always want to make sure your saw goes up and down, like 90-degree angle from the floor, always up and down, just really steady. So first off, before I actually start cutting as well, I'm going to go ahead and I've got to make sure that my blade has some lubrication on it, just for ease of sawing. It also helps you not break your saw blades. So I have this Burr Life is what it's called, and I just run that along the back of the blade to make sure that I've got like a nice slick surface when I go to start cutting. So next what I do is I line up my blade with my mark and I give it one good pull just to kind of get the blade going. That one pull will actually help you stay straight once you start really going. You kind of want to get a rhythm with this. So once you have that one pull, you just go ahead and you start moving your saw blade up and down in a really nice rhythm, and that will also help you get nice clean cuts. And there you have it. So I normally wouldn't use a big thick Sharpie to put a line on a metal piece that I want to cut out. I usually use a finer Sharpie, but I just wanted you guys to be able to see the line that I was kind of following. One more thing that you're going to want to know is that you want to be very careful where your fingers are when you're cutting, because these blades are extremely sharp, and if you slip, you can go through a finger really quickly. So make sure that you have some first aid material on hand if you're sawing a lot or you're a beginner. If you guys have any other tips or tricks that you would like to know, shoot me a message and I'll try to answer that. Or if you need help with sawing, or if you want a link to anything that I showed in this video, also shoot me a message and I'll get you that information. I hope that you all have a really great week, and I will see you next Thursday for another episode of T Hawks 2 Cents.